This method of exercise works surprisingly well in order to reverse insulin resistance. But it's not only about that, it's about driving down your blood sugar so now you can lose weight. So now you can decrease inflammation in your body. Now you can heal. I'll show you exactly how. Hey Wellness Warrior, I'm Dr. Zyrowski, and the topic of exercise is incredibly important when you're speaking of blood sugar instability simply because your muscles will act as a giant sponge to help you drive down blood sugar. As I mentioned, now you can lose weight, now you can decrease inflammation, now you can start to take control of your health when this happens. And when we look at blood sugar instability, it's important to understand how this is happening, right? Because it's not just about exercise, but it's also about the foods that you're eating, correct? Because what happens is when you consume carbs, when you consume sugar, your blood sugar rises. Insulin is now released from the pancreas. And when that insulin is released, it helps store the sugar into the cell. That's normal circumstances, right? But the reality is if you have insulin resistance, you're going to eat the carbs, blood sugar rises, insulin releases, but yet the sugar cannot be stored as energy into the cell. So insulin continues to rise and rise. And when that happens, that means that you're insulin resistant. And this is why you can go and do a blood test and you can actually just test insulin. And it'll tell you well in advance if you are pre-diabetic or even type 2 diabetic, because if your insulin levels are high, that means it's not effectively doing the job it's supposed to do, right? Now, because you can't get sugar into the cell, what happens is you start to get really high blood sugar, and one of the ways that you can actually start to drive down that blood sugar is through exercise. We're going to talk about 3 studies, but real quickly, I want to look at some of the symptoms that might show up, okay? Because sure, we can test blood, right? But the reality is there's over 100 million people who are estimated to be walking around with fatty liver and also prediabetes. And you know what's really interesting about fatty liver is everybody talks about fatty liver, but a lot of the studies are actually showing now that most people have fatty pancreas prior to having fatty liver. Pretty incredible, right? Because nobody talks about that. And the reason that this is a big deal is because usually insulin resistance is already there within the body. Now, there's a couple symptoms we want to watch out for. Fatigue, okay? Are you somebody who's just hitting that fatigue all the time, especially mid-afternoon? This is a big symptom of insulin resistance. Thirst. Wildly thirsty, feel like you need to drink more water all the time, and you can't satiate that thirst. Hunger is another one. Now, this hunger is pretty interesting because it can come in the way of, you haven't eaten in a little bit, now you're getting this intense hunger. You are somebody who maybe ate a meal and now you have a craving for something sweet, right? This is the reason, this whole hunger thing, this is the reason that so many people can go and follow the ketogenic diet, and one of the first things they'll tell you is, wow, all my cravings went away, all my hunger went away. It's because their insulin resistance has gone away. So hunger is a big one, increased urination, and then decreased blood sugar, okay? Now you're like, wait a minute, if I have increased blood sugar and insulin resistance, how do I have decreased blood sugar problems? Well, what must go up always is going to come down. And so what you'll find is that though you may eat and your blood sugar goes and spikes way up, when you're fasted or you haven't eaten in a while, your blood sugar crashes. So what do most people who have insulin resistance go and do? Oh my goodness, I need some sugar between meals. I need to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I need to have some carbs quick, right? Because they're looking for that quick stimulus to get this blood sugar back up to help them feel good, right? So one of the symptoms of blood sugar that's too high is blood sugar that's also too low. And really what's happening, instead of having stability, you're just going high, low, and in an extreme pattern, okay? So let's take a look at the 3 studies here. First, there was a study in the Journal of Physiology, and what they found in the way of exercise that would really help with insulin resistance is doing a 16-minute cycle, okay? Now you're like, ooh, 16 minutes, that's it? That's all I have to work out? Yeah, there was something called the Wingate method that they were using, right? And essentially what it is you would cycle on a bike for 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. And this is an exercise bike, by the way, right? I don't want you to get confused with like grabbing your pedal bike and going for a slow stroll for 30 seconds and then taking a quick break, right? They're on an exercise bike. They're going all out as hard as they can go for 30 seconds, and then they'll take a 30-second break, and they'll do that for 16 minutes. Now, what they found is that the participants over 14 days were able to dramatically improve their insulin sensitivity. Okay, so that was really powerful there. So that was out of the Journal of Physiology. Now let's take a look at the study that was in Biomedical Central. And what they did is they had men do 2 weeks of high intensity interval training. And in those 2 weeks, what they were doing is 15 minutes a day of exercise. You're like, wow, that's it, right? That's all I have to do is 15 minutes. Everybody's telling me I have to go do an hour. They were doing 15 minutes a day. And what they found was remarkable improvement in their insulin sensitivity. And so there's our second study. Now let's take a look at our third study. And then we'll talk about what this means for you and how you can implement this into your life. The third study was out of Frontiers of Physiology, and there was 40 women. And over a 10-week period, what they had them do is high intensity interval training. Same type of method that we just talked about in 2 different ways from these other 2 studies, right? You exercise really intensely for short durations. And what they found is that all metrics of cardiometabolic health were improved, okay? And what they mean is by all metrics of cardiometabolic health is they're looking at not only insulin sensitivity, but they're also looking at cholesterol and triglycerides and their HDL to HDLC ratios. They're looking at all the different metrics to look and see where the improvements were. And so it helped across the whole cardiometabolic pattern. So that's really powerful stuff, okay? So we're finding that these studies are showing that high intensity interval training, short duration, but all out bursts work really well. So what can you do to implement this into your life today? If you're somebody who's trying to lose weight, if you're somebody who's trying to become more insulin sensitive, if you're somebody who's trying to overcome fatty liver and fatty pancreas, if you're somebody who's trying to get your health under control, this works really well. First of all, we want to do short duration, high intensity exercise. There's no reason you can't do this every day. Now, you can do this in the form of sprints if you have a treadmill. If you have 2 legs and you have access to the outdoors, right? You can go outside and you can go and do sprints. And how you do this, if you were going to sprint, is you might do 30 seconds on, go for a sprint, run as fast as you can, and then walk for 30 seconds. Do that over a 20-minute period, okay? You could do it with a bike if you have a stationary bike in your home, right? A lot of people have Pelotons and all these different bikes in their home. You can use this in order to basically use what they refer to as the Wingate method, where you're doing 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, and do those all-out cycling sprints. And you know, in this particular study, they were doing it for 16 minutes a day, okay? So it wasn't much. So we can also even be a little bit creative, right? I mean, I've done this before where I've created my own high-intensity interval training exercises where it's like, you know what, we're doing jump rope, we're doing jumping jacks, we're doing air squats, we're doing push-ups, basically you can come up with your own little method, right? Now, what we want to look at is how often, right? So there's no reason you can't do this daily, but here's what I would do if you're somebody who's suffering from high blood sugar and you're really trying to get it under control. You wake up in the morning and you do about 3 to 5 minutes of high intensity interval training, right? So it's like you're gonna go and do some air squats, do some jumping jacks. You can even do this at the office, right? If you're really trying to get your blood sugar under control, take a quick break and go into a break room and do a quick little sprint of exercises, okay? And then once lunchtime comes, 3 to 5 minutes, high intensity training. And then once evening comes, 3 to 5 minutes. So the entire day, you've only worked out a total of like, you know, if it's on the low end of the spectrum, 9 minutes. If it's on the high end, it's more 15 minutes. But what happens is every time you do this, you are really stimulating your muscles to start pulling sugar out of the bloodstream, and you're lowering that blood sugar, which is really great, okay? So what we want to do is implement this in order to help with insulin resistance, right? We want to make sure that we're not only focusing on diet, but we're also looking at exercise is a great method in order to drive blood sugar down. Now, if you have any questions on this, drop them in the comment section below and I'll get to your questions. Now, there's a few things that we can do in the way of supplementation for insulin resistance as well. We can use things like berberine. I like to use it with alpha-lipoic acid to even support the inflammatory mechanism. We can use some formulas that have like fenugreek seed in them, cinnamon, and there's a lot of different ways that you can drive down blood sugar using different herbs and spices, okay? So we can use formulas that include that. Now, stepping out of the realm of supplementation, we can use apple cider vinegar. So I'll put some different links to resources down in the description below. You can check those out. And if you like this video here, I think you'll really like this video next.